Welcome to Will It Work? I'm Kevin. Today we're looking at the Atari 5200. 5200's unusual. It's an unusual console. People will tell you about how it was a big failure for a number of reasons. And it was. But would it have been had there not been a video game crash? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I can tell you this much. This whole unit is way too big for what it is. Like, I don't know how big the circuit board is in here, but I think they could have made it smaller. I mean, the back portion back here lifts up, and it's just empty space that can hold, like, the controllers and things. Unnecessary and just large and very ungainly. It does have 4 controller slots in it, cartridge port, and they did an advanced thing with the controller. They gave you 2 buttons on that side, 2 buttons on this side, the number pad, start, pause, and reset right on the controller. And then they had a analog control as well as a Pong-like control, I guess you would say. The problem with this joystick is that it didn't really right center itself very well, or at all, basically. So being analog, when you're playing games that require you to, you know, have a bit more precision, it wasn't good. But a lot of people will mark that as a failure, but honestly, that's not really the reason. The reason is simply because it was expensive, and at a time when, you know, people had moved on from consoles and were playing games on PCs. I don't know how else to really describe it, because we have that now. So if you weren't alive back then, it's hard to explain. Like, people had PCs now and consoles, and they sort of live together. So some people play console games, some people play PC games, some people like me play both. You know, some people play neither. But with video games, the weird thing that happened there for a couple of years was that people didn't have home computers, right? So they first, in the 70s, they got themselves a Pong system or some other electronic TV game. That graduated to the 2600 for the most part. Could have had the Intellivision, could have had something else. Most people had a 2600. It was extremely popular. People got the 2600, and then the next thing up from that was computers. You saw that where, like, the Odyssey had a keyboard, the Intellivision let you add a keyboard. Everything was trying to show you, like, yeah, you know, the next step of this is the computer. You know, you get a home computer, and there's all these things you can do with the computer. You can do work on the computer, you can type letters, you know, you can print them out, you can do all this sort of stuff that, you know, the game console can't do. You know, the computer is going to open up new worlds for you. The kids will get their education, you'll be able to get things done. And really, it did a little bit of that, right? Like, it did some word processing, which, you know, I don't take away from, you know, certainly printing things out for a letter that you would mail, because email wasn't around back then. It wasn't a bad thing if you wanted to, like, type rather than handwrite a letter to somebody, and or do a book report or something and print it out on some dot matrix printer. You could do it, but a lot of that was cumbersome, right? It wasn't ease of use back then. It worked, but the whole, like, learning how to load something up, and then learning that application, and then learning how to, like, you know, connect the printer, feed the printer the ink and the paper, and get that all to print out, and make sure everything's playing nice and working, and there's no... you know what I mean? We all kind of know how it is today with grandma trying to use the computer. Back then, it was just like a no-go. And so the only people that really ended up using the family computer were the kids, because the kids wanted to play games. They figured out how to trade games with their friends, and you know, they were playing games on there, and it just became another game system. And then, you know, by the time the Nintendo Entertainment System came along, in North America anyway, you know, people were ready to go back to consoles, because that's where the the games were at that they wanted to play. Not everybody. Some people, like me, stayed using the computers. A lot of people did, but there was a big enough market of, say, younger kids that still wanted to play NES and that sort of thing, and they weren't as into the computer. But at the end of the day, they just wanted to throw in a cartridge and play a game. It's fine. And that came after the 5200, right? Atari had been working on the 7800, and it should have come out years earlier. The 5200 just launched at a time when the market was just not as healthy as it was in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was expensive, and people, they just weren't really ready for the next level. And part of it also is that, Atari wasn't really selling the experience other than improved graphics. You would play mostly the same games that you played before. They weren't new anymore. They did look better, but, not so great. But I'll tell you, the 5200, for what it is, it's not a bad system power-wise. I mean, it's competitive graphically for the things, the ColecoVisions and the things that, that would have been like the Sega SG-1000 or Mark I era. And at the same time, when the Nintendo Entertainment System was first coming out, as the Famicom in Japan, shortly thereafter, the 5200 would have been competitive, okay? I'm not saying it would have been as good as the NES, but it wasn't bad. And the 7800 was competitive against the NES, but also they have different pros and cons. But we'll look at a couple of games. I only have a couple of games. I used to have a whole box of games. I gave them away or something. I don't know what happened to them, but I have two. I have Galaxian and I have Pac-Man. We've certainly looked at many editions of Pac-Man, so it'll probably be a little bit interesting to see how the Atari 5200's version works or looks like, because we've seen a lot of the other ones, both arcade versions. We've seen XEGS, I think. We've seen Pac-Man like through this whole series. So we'll take a look at the 5200's Pac-Man. We'll take a look at Galaxian, and I'll try the controller out and make sure everything's working right, as well as making sure the console still works. It does have the unique thing, though, where you plug it in to the switch box. So the switch box, the adapter that you plug this thing into, plugs into the switch box that's behind the TV. And then the RF cable that is coming from the 5200 that drives the signal to the switch box, to the television, also sends power back to the unit. So it's kind of crazy, because you have to make sure you have that switch box, because otherwise you can't use this system. You need that particular switch box with this. You can't use a different one. I've only seen one other system that worked like that. But anyway, we're going to switch over to the video side. Here we go. Oh, so we're looking at the 5200 here. I forgot I had to turn on the VCR so we could see it. We're looking at Galaxian for the 5200. So let's see if I press start. Okay. Trying to see if I'm actually moving this thing. Okay. I'm not actually firing. Okay, now I am. So yeah, the analog control, like if I push it hard to the left, it'll keep moving left. It won't recenter itself. So I push hard to, like I'm not touching it, and it's still moving to the right. Not touching it, still moving to the left. So like I said, it doesn't right center itself. So you basically have to be constantly in motion, with your hands, to make sure that it moves back to the center and stays there, which it does not do easily. Now, people point this out as a problem, and it is, but it's also something that could have been easily fixed. They could have sold an aftermarket controller, as well as, revised the system to include a more centered stick. This wouldn't have been a big deal. We've seen that kind of thing before. The fact of the matter is that the system just didn't sell enough units to justify that sort of an investment, I suppose. And there may have been more to it. Like, I don't really know the whole story behind the 5200, but there may have been more about like costs associated with this system and it not being, maybe Atari didn't want to sell it. You know, the Atari went through also some managerial, like, ownership changes. You know, they were owned by Warner for a while, and then they, you know, Bushnell, and so it may have also just been a switch in management as well. And it's such a weird sort of history with Atari, because they were fairly successful in this space, and this space is profitable, and yet, you know, they weren't managed well. Like, and it's just really unusual. And then Galaxian repeats. I've never really cared for Galaxian. Galaga at least had the bonus boards, and you could turn into more than one spaceship. Galaxian always felt like Galaga Light. It's really not into it. Better than Space Invaders? Okay. But just barely. Alright, let's check out Pac-Man. Pac-Man. I wish I still had Jungle Hunt, though. That was the one I liked to play the most on the 5200. But it does work. The signal's nice and strong. You know, we are going through an RF, so this is not a composite out. But we have a really nice, strong RF signal in this unit, which happens to make sense since we're driving power straight into it. Press 1 or 2 player game for 2 player game. Press game level to change difficulty. Press start to play game. 1 player game. Press start. So this is an arcade. You can see how it's more. See, I can't go left. Why can't I go left? I think that's a problem with this particular controller, but I don't. Like, I was going left when I was playing Galaxian, as we all saw. But for some reason, Pac-Man's not letting me go left. At all. Will not do it. Unfortunately, I only have the one controller with this unit. I think it probably originally came with 2, but it, I don't think it's the... It could be something that's whacked with the game itself, to be honest. Let me switch it to 2 player. And then I can try... Press 1 2 player for 2 player game. Press game level to change difficulty. There's actually no button on here that says game level. Now maybe it just had an overslip. Let's see if the packaging contains an overslip, because I do have the packaging here. Let's see if it has anything in that regard. It does. Okay, and they're using the bottom left. Rather than using 1 and 2 for 1 or 2 player, you actually pushed asterisks to get 1 or 2 player, and game level is on the right. So let's switch that to 2 player. And what I will do is I'll switch the controller to the other port, and we'll see if it's a port problem. And then we'll hit start. Now, we've played the Miss Pac-Man title. There is no going right, man. Okay. We played the Miss Pac-Man title, and, you know, we've seen some of the more advanced graphics. This does not look arcade perfect, but still cannot go right, even in the second port, and it does not want to go down. Wow. Crazy. It's just, I don't know. This is a weird one. Hey, it went left that time, and I took it out. 1982. I think the video game crash started in 83. I think. Let's start. To look it up. People were still playing video games, though. It's funny to think that they weren't or something. Reset. Start. Why does this not want to go to the right now? It's so weird. Did the exact same thing. Well, anyway, it could be the controller. It could be the game somehow. You know, I don't know how this is actually engineered, so I couldn't say for sure if, like, you know, maybe the game cartridge has some kind of... What if I just turn it on without power? Complain about that? Some deox in there. Hit it with some Q-tips. Maybe it uses some sort of, you know, direct control. That's interesting that I left it on, pushed the cartridge in, and it just took it. It's really weird. Wiggle the control port out a little bit. It's like if I just put the controller port in just a little bit of a way, it kind of wants to go, but not really. Anyway, who knows? It all could probably use a little TLC. I need some more cartridges to really kind of work it out. Maybe I'll invest in getting another 5200 controller at some point. There's some people I think that sell some aftermarket ones. It might be good to get one to keep the system sort of relevant. But anyway, that's it for the 5200. I wish I did have more games to show you, but I don't. But you get a kind of an idea of what it was. It was, you know, it was decent. You know, it wasn't NES level, but it was pretty close, right? You know, it's right under it, I think. And so, not too bad. All right, well, that's it for today. We'll look at something new tomorrow. Thanks for watching.